Hi, my name's Lee. I work in public health, which is based on community-based interventions to help an overall community and eventually the nation as a whole. We figure that working in small communities can help us improve the quality of life for the state that we live in, the country that we live in, and eventually the world. So this is brought to you by our nonprofit organization, Mental Health for All. And this class discussion that we're going to do is about ADHD symptoms and the classifications of ADHD. Now this is being it's being recorded at the same time that I'm doing this. So if you're watching this on YouTube at a later date, hi! I am going to be looking down and at the chat because I'm live streaming this on TikTok at the same time that I am recording it so that I can put it up on YouTube, because I did have several people ask me for that. If I have to stop to read a comment, it might look a little awkward. I ask that you bear with me. If you're with me on TikTok and you have questions that pertain to this, please feel free to ask them. If I do not have the ability to answer that question, or if it does not pertain to the class that we are doing, I will make sure to write it down, and we can talk about it during the Q&A portion of this, which follows this class. So, do I have any questions prior to getting started? There is a lag on TikTok, so it is going to take a second before I start. This class should not take very long. It might be 15 minutes to 30 minutes, depending on how fast I move along and what questions are going to be involved. I know that your time is valuable, and I appreciate you coming and spending some time with me. Let's first talk about the classifications of ADHD. The nomenclature ADD no longer exists, and a lot of people seem to still use that nomenclature, and it's understandable. For a very, very, very long time, ADD was the gold standard. It was its own diagnosis in the DSM-5, which is known as the Mental Health Bible. Any mental illness, learning disability is located in this DSM, and because ADHD used to have its own diagnosis, its own set of diagnosing criteria, it got diagnosed a lot between the 1970s and 2015, when it officially was no longer entering the DSM-5. But as of 2015, ADD became a part of ADHD, and there's a fantastic reason for that. Originally, we thought that ADD and ADHD were two separate illnesses, two separate medical conditions, I should say. Because having ADHD is not necessarily a mental illness, it's more along the lines of a learning disability. But an executive dysfunction, if you will. But I digress. We will talk about this, I promise. ADD, as of 2015, falls under ADHD as inattentive type ADHD. What the heck does that mean? Well, there are 3 different versions of ADHD in the DSM-5, which is the current and up-to-date DSM that is followed by medical health professionals all around the world. So, the 3 types are your ADHD hyperactive, your ADHD inattentive, and your ADHD combination. When we talk about ADHD, people tend to think of the hyperactive because that's what ADHD was for a very long time. This is the example where, like, okay, you gave a 3-year-old a shit ton of sugar, and now they're bouncing off the walls like a crackhead. This is what people kind of equate ADHD to. It is like having a motor. You are constantly moving, bouncing your legs. You are go, 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 go all of the time, and it has a lot of outward symptoms. Inattentive ADHD, which is what ADD used to be, is more of your daydreamers. These are your people who think more than they present outwardly. And it's not that they aren't hyperactive. The difference between somebody who's ADHD hyperactive and ADHD inattentive is that your hyperactive shows all of these symptoms outwardly, compared to a person who's inattentive and shows all of these symptoms inwardly. If you're an inattentive type, you're not necessarily bouncing off the walls. Instead, your mind is going a mile a minute, and it refuses to calm down. And it is just as exhausting as having ADHD hyperactivity. It is just a different way to show that hyperactivity. The third type of ADHD is your combination ADHD. These are your individuals who can have any list of the symptoms from hyperactivity and your inattentive type. Now, when ADD became ADHD in 2015, we had a lot of people move over into the inattentive type ADHD. Part of the reason why ADD does not exist anymore is because we realized that the list of symptoms between ADHD and ADD did not necessarily fit perfectly with a whole swath of people. We had a whole group of people who had mixed diagnoses between ADHD and ADD. So, by combining ADD with ADHD and just making it inattentive type, we opened up this whole new world of ADHD called combination ADHD. Some of the people that were diagnosed with ADD when they moved over became combo ADHD. And some of the people who were already diagnosed with ADHD but showed some of the daydreaming type symptoms of inattentive ADHD moved from being ADHD to combination ADHD. So this is part of the reason why ADD is no longer a proper nomenclature for anybody. You may have been diagnosed back in a time pre-2015 when ADD was a thing, but you're no longer considered ADD. You're considered attention hyper deficit disorder. Are there any questions about that? And just a reminder, if you're on YouTube, I am live streaming this at the same time, which is why I'm going to stop every so often and ask for questions. And there is a lag, so I'm going to go ahead and let the lag kind of catch up. It's also a fantastic time for me to take a sip of coffee. Now, on TikTok, one of the things that I am doing for the entire month of October, which, by the way, if you did not know, is ADHD Awareness Month. Yes, we have our own month. And yes, it is, in my opinion, the best month in the calendar. Spooky season, bitches. I digress. I got a question in the chat about what are intrusive thoughts. And unfortunately, that does not necessarily fit in with this class. However, if you do want to hold on to that until the end of the Q&A, or until the end of the class and do the Q&A, I will talk about intrusive thinking and what it is. The last thing I have to do for this class is talk about the symptoms of ADD. Or, I'm sorry, of ADHD. See, I've said ADD so many times in that definition that even I am slipping into saying ADD. And it's okay to not be perfect with that, by the way. I was originally diagnosed ADD, and it's past 2015 when I got my diagnosis. I should have been diagnosed as combination ADHD, but I was not. So there are still doctors who are also holding on to that ADD nomenclature, even though it's no longer the proper nomenclature. So this is where a lot of the confusion about ADD and ADHD comes from. But I did write it down so that way I don't forget, because I do have ADHD and I will fucking forget. So jumping into some of the symptoms about ADHD. You have basic symptoms that everybody thinks about. When you have your hyperactive ADHD, you get a lot of stimming. That's the bouncing the legs, the picking at your face, the pulling at your lip. I grind my teeth. I rub my head a lot. It's part of the reason why my head is shaved. We have some negative associations with stims as well, which are things like scratching yourself or plucking out hair. That's an additional medical condition, which for the life of me I cannot think of right now, but I will put it in the comment section when I post this video. I know it starts with a T. But that movement, that hyperactivity, that feeling wound up like you are controlled by a motor and you cannot turn it off. Think the Energizer Bunny. That is a symptom of classic ADHD, which is your hyperactivity. This can also happen in inattentive type. The difference is that instead of showing physical movement, your brain is bouncing around from idea to idea to idea to idea all day long. And these ideas do not allow you to necessarily focus on the task at hand. For this reason, inattentive type ADHD can also fall into daydreaming patterns, where they get caught up in this thought and they kind of disconnect from the reality that is in front of them. It's not disassociating. Disassociating is a completely different thing that happens in issues like DID. But it's kind of like creating your own little story, your narrative, your own little world inside your head, and you're thinking about it all the fucking time. It can make it really hard to concentrate. And with ADHD being an executive dysfunction, we have problems with things such as time management skills, understanding time and the passage of time, the inability to see things that are directly in front of us. This is called unintentional blindness. Jeez, crow. We have object permanence issues, which is when something is out of sight, out of mind. When people even are out of sight, out of mind, we don't have a tendency to remember that they're there. This is actually something that happens very frequently with ADHD, even though when we talk about object permanence, typically it's spoken about with infants and their inability to understand that just because they can't see a parent because they left the room does not mean that that parent ceases to exist, that they are still there. We have issues with time management and organizational skills. We have issues with all sorts of things that make life a little bit harder for a person with ADHD. There are some symptoms that are overlooked and people don't necessarily realize are associated with ADHD, even when you have ADHD yourself. So I wasn't diagnosed until I was 31 years old. Yes, that is a late diagnosis, but that's also because I'm female. And that's a whole nother class. But females do go underdiagnosed with ADHD because we present differently than males do. I've done so much research into ADHD, and I've talked to so many health professionals about this exact thing so that I could come and speak with people about ADHD. And after my diagnosis and after all of the research, I actually started to do public speaking about, it started as being about ADHD and then moved on to mental health. So I know a lot about ADHD. I know a lot of the tips and tricks and stuff like that to help with ADHD. Actually, there's an example of ADHD going on right now, and that is my rambling talking and my inability to stay on task. I am sorry about that. I'm going to digress. I'm going to redirect. We were talking about symptoms. Some symptoms of ADHD that are not commonly thought of, but are issues with ADHD, include things like imposter syndrome. Imposter syndrome in a person like me is I see somebody that I want to emulate. I see people such as on TikTok, Camden ADHD, fantastic ADHD content creator. If you're not following her, I highly recommend going and giving her a follow. Excuse me. I see where she's at, and I want to be there. So I work hard to get to where she is at, and even though I am progressing, because I am not where she is right now, I start feeling like everything that I'm doing is not worth it, that I will never get to that point that she is at, and that obviously I don't know what I'm talking about because people do not find value in what I am saying. Logically, this isn't true because if it wasn't true, I wouldn't have 6,000 followers on TikTok who come to listen to what I say. I wouldn't be here doing this live right now with almost double digits in my room listening to what I have to say about ADHD. But imposter syndrome is not a logical issue. Imposter syndrome feeds on your insecurities and makes you feel like you don't know what you're talking about. RSD, I give a class every Wednesday night at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time on TikTok, and I also live stream it to my YouTube channel. Last week, I did a course, 2 weeks ago, something like that. I did a course on RSD, which is rejection-sensitive dysphoria. And even though it is not a symptom in the DSM-5 that is associated with ADHD, it's found that almost 100% of individuals with ADHD suffer from RSD as well. RSD, or rejection-sensitive dysphoria, is when an individual has an issue and starts to internalize the perception that they are about to be rejected, or a criticism. And it's typically found in people who the person with RSD looks up to. So if I look up to, this is really bad, I am a product of childhood abuse. And I used to look up to my abuser like they were my everything when I was much younger. And because I got nothing but criticism and things that I went through in my house from my abuser, who I looked up to, I started suffering with RSD issues really hardcore. And because nothing was done about it, I tend to suffer more as an adult with RSD issues as well. This can also happen with, there was a stranger who came into my TikTok, and they were obviously trolling me, but some of the things that they said made me panic, and I felt criticized. And because of that, I had this internal feeling of guilt, and this internal feeling of just depression that came with it, because RSD comes out in one of two ways. The first is that depression, which can actually lead to suicidal ideation. And the other one is an outward expression, which leads to the third untalked about issue with ADHD, which happens to be things like anger management issues. People with ADHD are exceptionally emotional individuals. This means that we feel deeply, we feel hard. We pick up on the things that other people are feeling because we are overly perceptive at it. And this can lead to anger management issues. In fact, about 50%, if I remember correctly, of the people that go to anger management courses are also diagnosed as having ADHD. We have short fuses on average. This is obviously not meant to be a blanket statement. Not everybody with ADHD has a short fuse, but a good number of us do. And because we feel so deeply when we feel rejected or hurt, or somebody says something that they don't like, or our oversensitivity to stimulus, which is a huge thing and the fourth untalked about issue with ADHD, we can snap, and it comes out in bouts of anger. I have said things to my children that I do not, that I'm not happy about. In fact, I did a post on TikTok about this the other day, in which I mentioned I got so angry at my kids and for whatever reason could not force myself to walk away, which is a practice that I am trying to get better at. I literally told my kids that obviously me being the nice mom wasn't working and they wanted me to be a dick, so welcome to the Thunderdome, bitches. It's about to be a rough ride, so buckle up. That's not something I expected to ever say to my kids. That wasn't even something I ever expected that I was going to say in an honest manner to anybody outside of joking. But in a fit of anger, that came out. We also tend to see that parents who have ADHD may be more likely to do things like spank their child out of anger. So, if you're struggling with this and you have ADHD, I want you to know that by no means does this mean that you are a slave to those feelings, because you are not. Not at all. Not even a little bit. There are things that we can do to help with anger management skills as an adult or even as a child, because children have anger management issues too, right? I mean, I've got a 4-year-old who I am open and honest about having mental health issues. He has chased his brother around the house with a carving knife one day. He gets so angry. And there are even things that we're putting in place for him to help him with his anger management skills. So you are not by any means a slave to your anger. It is just a not very often discussed issue with ADHD. Another example of something that's not talked about very often is our, like I said, our time blindness is one of them. We don't have the ability to really understand the passage of time. This doesn't mean we can't read a clock, because obviously, once you become an adult, by that point, I hope you can read both an analog and, if not, a digital clock. But if you ask somebody with ADHD how long a task is going to take them, they may not be able to tell you accurately how long it's going to take. I may have to sit down and write a letter and believe that it's only going to take me 5 minutes to do, but because I can't focus, it ends up taking me 3 hours instead. How long do you think we've been doing this class for? I want you to I want you to answer honestly without, if you're looking on YouTube, without looking at the bar to tell you. I'll give you a second. This class has lasted 20 minutes and 17 seconds. And it's actually kind of a coincidence that it ended up on such a nice even number when I did that. But yes, this class has only been going on for 20 minutes, and for some of you it may feel like it's been going on for an entire hour. I had a meeting with my therapist for my son, and it felt like it went on for 3 hours when we were only 30 minutes into the 1 hour meeting. I'm sorry, I do have a kid. My kid does come first, and because my kid comes first, that means that there is a chance that I'm going to be interrupted. Yes, baby, I know. So I do apologize for any interruptions that do happen. I am sorry, not sorry, because my kids do and always will come first. Luckily, he's asking for something very quickly. Here, Finn. Love you, baby. So, yes, time blindness is an issue. The other issue that is not often talked about that does have a name that I felt so dumb because I could not remember the name of yesterday was inattentional blindness. And this is when we see something on a daily basis that we just don't notice it's there anymore. And that's the reason why things like Post-it notes on the front door to remind us to bring lunch doesn't work. Instead, you put your car keys on top of your lunch bag in the refrigerator because you're not going anywhere without your car keys, and if they're on top of your lunch, you'll remember to grab your lunch. There are little tips and tricks and stuff like that that we definitely need to work on trying to implement with ADHD, and it kind of sucks that we are neurodivergent individuals in a neurotypical world. But there are things that we can do to help. So those are some of the signs, symptoms. Like I said, your inability to focus, hyperfocus is a... Hey, what's going on, kiddos? Please stop. What happened? It is Hayden's day, baby. Do you want to ask him if you can play with the Game Boy? Can you play with your Game Boy?
Yeah.
Why don't you go play games? Okay, you want to sit there? You can sit right there. You can. Oh, you need a passcode too. Here you go. Why don't you grab the Game Boy and give it to Finn?
No.
You don't have to play it. It's just so you have it in case you want it. Once again, sorry, not sorry. He is also going to probably be whining in the background. This is also my child with severe ADHD and possibly being on the autism spectrum. You can sit right there, but you can't stand up, okay? I'll give you little head rubs. How's that sound? Is that good? Okay, I'm gonna make lunch after this, okay? But you're hungry. You can't eat candy all day, kid. This is also my child who has severe ADHD and possibly being on the autism spectrum or having an issue like ODD or CD. All of which is actually common when it comes to ADHD. So, yes, those are some of the signs and symptoms. Like I said, inattentiveness, hyperfocus is one of them that I didn't really touch on. It's your ability to zone in on a project and be go on that project. And a lot of people seem to think that if we have the ability to focus on something, obviously we don't have ADHD. That's not true. Hyperfocus is a superpower of ADHD. The consistent running of your mind, the feeling like you're wound up on a motor, the bouncing, stimming sensations, the even destructive stimming sensations. Those are things, RSD, time blindness. There are more, and I'm sure that I have forgotten it, but I did say that I wanted to keep this class at about 30 minutes, and we are coming up on 25 minutes right now. So did anybody have any questions about anything related to ADHD or a possible symptom that you are not sure if it is ADHD and you would like to know if it's ADHD related? What's up? Yeah, that's green. Good job, baby. Thank you for the congratulations on the 6K, by the way. I am working hard on this. Some of the possible symptoms of ADHD is what I was asked for somebody who came in late to the class, so I'm going to go ahead and list some of them off again. Inability to focus is a big one. That means that we can be given a task and we just cannot concentrate on it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, there's hyperfocus. That's when we get into a task that we're doing and we are so into it that we kind of drown out the world around us. There's also time blindness, our inability to tell time and the passage of time. We can inaccurately tell you how long a task is going to end up taking us because we don't have the slightest fucking clue. Inattentional blindness, this is when we see something so often that we are just completely ignorant to the fact that it is there at a certain point. I have a calendar on my wall, I have to move it once a month because if I don't move it, I'm going to have inattentional blindness with it. There is anger management issues, having mood swings. They are always as a result of a trigger. If they happen randomly, that's more bipolar disorder than it is ADHD. ADHD mood swings happen because something has happened to make us feel extreme joy or extreme rage. The squirrel syndrome, where you're like, oh, squirrel, when you're in the middle of a conversation, and that bouncing around 30 different topics in 10 minutes. Another one I didn't mention, but I should mention, a lot of adults with ADHD who weren't diagnosed until later in life have a hard time looking people in the eye. So you see that I constantly look away from the camera, or I'm looking down and it doesn't look like I'm looking into the camera. That's because I'm looking at the chat, I'm looking at myself, I'm looking away from the camera because I know that the camera is essentially the eyes, and you have a hard time making contact with eyes. Yes, ADHD can include physical anger issues. My 4-year-old with ADHD has decked me. In fact, 2 weeks ago I had a swollen jaw because he punched me. So yeah, that's fun. Yep, earlobes are a good thing. I try to look past the person. I'll look at their forehead or their nose. But I can't make eye contact with individuals. It's very uncomfortable for me. So that is a very common one with ADHD as well. Disorganization is a big one. A lot of the organizational skills that we learn have to do with neurotypical thinking, and they work for people who are neurotypical. But because we suffer from, another one is our object permanence issues, where something's out of sight, out of mind. A lot of neurotypical organization skills have us file things away so that we can't see them, but that doesn't work for us because we suffer with object permanence. So those are some of the examples. I'm sure there's more. I'm sure I mentioned one or two more. Like I said, this is going to be up on the YouTube channel. During the Q&A here, I'm actually going to go ahead and post it. Yep, behind the person is a great idea to do if you struggle with eye contact. Like I said, I try to look through the person, which is kind of a similar concept. The only difference is that I let my eyes unfocus. And I'm not really looking at the person. I'm looking like at a blob, and I can see like what's behind them. So it's similar, but yeah. Were there any other questions about ADHD classes and symptoms? Like I said, quick recap on the types. There are 3 types: ADHD hyperactive, ADHD inattentive, and ADHD combination. ADD is no longer a nomenclature that's used, and it has not been used since 2015, once the DSM-5 came out. Yes, you will still have doctors tell you that ADD is a viable example or a viable medical condition. It is no longer a medical condition, and if you have a doctor who's trying to tell you that you have ADHD or that you have ADD and not ADHD, I recommend either finding a different doctor or correcting that doctor and then finding another doctor if they don't listen. Alrighty. I'm going to go ahead and end this class for the YouTube. Thank you everybody who watched, and make sure that you like this video and subscribe if you found any value in it. I'm going to be uploading at least one new class video a week. So I hope you all have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.